This is Mikey Borup for PremiumBeat.com, and in this After Effects course, you will learn the basics to advanced features of After Effects: interface, shape layers, motion tracking, compositing, and more. During these tutorials, feel free to pause, rewind, and ask questions. I will be using After Effects CC version 12.2, but most of the techniques learned can be used in older versions. In this video, we'll cover compositing, transfer modes, chroma key, rotoscoping, masking, and track mats. So let's fire up After Effects and get started. So here I am in After Effects. I already have a composition created and I call it compositing. First, let's talk about transfer modes. And if you're at all familiar with Photoshop, then you kind of know what transfer modes are. And in order to do transfer modes, we need to have some layers in here. So let's grab the text tool and call this a layer. And let's bring in some of these pictures. So I've got some footage here. This is just a paper background. And we have also some bricks. Let's move the bricks to the top. And to show you what transfer modes does, really the best way is to get in here and kind of play around. But if I go down here in the timeline, it says mode, and those are the transfer modes. Now make sure there's this switch down here that switches between switches and modes, and we want it to be set to modes. So I come in here, and if I go to multiply, it's going to multiply this on, and you can barely see it just because multiply didn't do a lot because this bottom layer is really white. Let's try some of these others. Screen, you can kind of see the brick is being applied on top of the white paper. We also have like divide, difference, and hard light. So they're doing different modes, and you can see they're all kind of combining together. So those are the transfer modes. I'm going to set this back up to normal. So that's transfer modes. Now another thing that we can do is track mats. And so to show you what a track mat does, I'm going to take this text layer and move it to the top. And then on this brick layer, I'm going to come in here and label these. So I just hit enter. I'm going to call this brick paper. So on this brick layer, there's also this column over here that says track mat. And it's not spelled properly, but it says track mat. And I come in here, I'm going to hit alpha mat. And what alpha mat did, as you can see, is it used this layer up here, the text layer, as a cookie cutter to cut out this brick layer. And then if we do alpha mat inverted, it'll just do the inverse. Let's go back to alpha mat. Now even what I can do is I can take this layer, I can keyframe it. So I'm going to hit P on the keyboard. It brings up my position value. And I'm going to keyframe the position. And you can see that only that layer is moving, but the brick layer and the paper layer are staying still. I can even keyframe things like scale. I just hit S on the keyboard and it brings up my scale. See, and you can get some cool effects going that way. Now what would happen if we now decide to do some keyframing on the other layer? So I'm going to come in here to the brick layer. I'm going to keyframe the position of this and move it like that. So now as we animate through this, they're all moving at different speeds, at different directions, and you get kind of a cool look going on here. Another thing I can do is let's take this paper layer, let's duplicate it, let's bring it to the top. And what I want to do is I want to add some contrast to this. So I'm going to go to my effects, color correction. I'm just going to go to brightness and contrast. And let's increase the contrast. And then what I can do with this is let's do a transfer mode and let's do multiply. And what I want to do is I want this to look like it's scaling up with this layer. So there's two things I want to do. Is I want to take this text layer and I'm going to duplicate this. I'm going to bring it over the paper. And then I'm going to use the alpha mat again. And then I'm going to take this paper layer and parent it to the text layer. And what you can see, even if we turn off this brick layer, and what you can see is that papered layer is scaling up with the text layer. So kind of a cool effect that we got going on here. Let's turn that brick layer back on. Maybe even come into the brick layer and change the opacity down a little bit. So this is some stuff we can do. Let's kind of add some more to this and experiment with some compositing and some track mats. Another thing we can do, since these are layers, we have what's called layer styles. So let's come up here to where it says layer. Well, we need to select a layer first. So let's select this brick layer. Go down to layer, layer styles. And you have all these drop shadow, inner shadow, outer glow, things like that. Let's do a drop shadow. And you can see it added a drop shadow to it. And then down here at the bottom, here are my controllers for this. Let's bring the opacity up. Bring the size up. And we've got kind of a drop shadow going on. Maybe change the spread. Okay. What else we can do? Let's go back to the layer styles. And let's see what else there is. There's one called stroke. So you can see I can create some interesting looks just by adding different textures, different track mats, different transfer modes, and different layer styles. So this is kind of the basics of compositing right now. Now let's go into other ways of adding footage on top of other footage. And that's using like a green screen or a chroma key. So all the things I'm going to be talking in here are going to be how to composite footage together. This is using textures and track mats. Let's go into a green screen. So I'm going to take actually all these layers, delete them all, and let's bring in a piece of footage that has green screen in it. And it's too big for this, so I'm going to scale this down. This is at 1080p. My current resolution is at 720p, so I'm going to bring this down to 67%, and that should bring it right in there. And you can see this is green screen footage. And how do you get this green screen to come out, to disappear? Well, you need to use an effect called a chroma key effect. And in After Effects, it's called key light. So let's do that now. So I'm going to go to the very beginning of this clip, highlight it. Let's go to Effect, and you can see keying right here. And then go to key light. And how key light works is there's the screen color, and I'm going to grab this eyedropper, click on the green, and then it disappears. So, but that's not all there is to it. You see, there's still this edge here, and there's some kind of darkness. So I'm going to switch over my view to screen matte, and then I can see, okay, this is not perfect. The perfect key, you're going to want everything that you want to be visible to be white, everything you want to be invisible to be black. And there's lots of grays in between. Now things around the hair, and if you want kind of a soft key, that's going to be gray in between, but her shirt here, I don't want to be gray. This I don't want to be gray, so I need to adjust this. And if I look in the view, I'm in the screen matte view, so obviously I need to go down here to this screen matte menu. And I've got clip black, clip white, screen grow and softness and things like that. So I'm going to adjust the black and the white levels. So I can clip the white. This is basically just adding contrast to the matte. Clip the black, and then maybe add some screen softness. And maybe shrink it a tiny bit. And then after I've got that, let's come into the final results. And this is what it's looking like. I still do have these edges here. And how to get rid of those is with a mask tool. And so in After Effects, you can mask with shapes. If I click up here, there's shapes, and there's also a pen tool. So if I mask with a shape, I've got rectangle, rounded, rectangle, ellipse, polygon, star tool, and they're going to be, in that exact shape. If I go to like a star tool, yeah, that's cool and all, but not very useful for this look. So I'm going to actually grab the pen tool, and I'm just going to click right here, grab this corner, and like that. and that's my mask. And now let me talk a little bit about masking. Masking is kind of a cool thing. It's how to get rid of things, unwanted footage. And I can see right here, her finger, her hand is kind of in the mask. So what I need to do is I need to adjust that mask just a tiny bit. So in the mask, I can keyframe the path, the feather, the opacity, and the expansion. So to show this better, let's do this on a solid layer. So I'm going to bring in a new solid. Let's make it comp size. And let's add a mask to this. So I'm just using the pen tool again, and I'm going to just create some random shape. And it masks everything out. Now, the layer itself is still the same size as the comp, but it's masking it in. And let's go in. And in the mask settings, I can invert it. I can set this to different transfer modes, but these are only going to work when you have multiple masks and they add together or they subtract or they things like that. So, but I'm going to keep this just like this for now. And the path, I can keyframe this mask path. Click on the keyframe there, and now I can come in. I'm going to click off and then click back on to one of these points, and I can animate this path, and everything will kind of move in between. Let's look at some of these other things. The mask feather will, of course, feather the edge. The mask opacity is basically the opacity of the mask of the layer. It's not extremely useful. I've actually never really used the mask opacity in any of my workings I've done. I usually just change the opacity on the layer or different things like that. And then the mask expansion is it takes this line and it either brings it in or brings it out. So I can go in or I can go out. Let's take the feather off so you can see exactly what's going on. And that's the mask expansion. Bringing that back to 0. And so that's kind of the mask tool. Now, up here, if I click and hold on the pen tool, there's this feather mask tool, or it's G on the keyboard. And what this is the variable mask feather. I can add a feather to it, but say I want it to be more blurred up here on this top, but not on the bottom. Then what I do, add a feather point to the bottom and make it so it's not blurry. And I can keep on adding points in different spots and have a very unique kind of feather. It's not uniform like if you use the feather down here. And so there are definitely times when you need to have a unique kind of look. Now, as you can see, if I highlight this, I've got all these lines. And so there's this button over here, and I talked about this in a previous video. This will hide the mask lines, and so you don't really see them. But if you just click off of the layer so it's not longer highlighted, then you won't see them as well. So that's masks. Back to what we were doing though with some green screen. So I've got that masked out and it's on here. Green screen is there. If I go into the screen mat, it looks pretty good. I can come in and hide this background, and you can see that she's definitely on a transparent layer. And the thing about doing a green screen key is now this layer thinks that this is the edge. So things that with layer styles, so I can come in and add a stroke to this layer, and it's going to add it right around here. The other thing I can get with layer styles like a stroke is I can see if I've got a little bit of bad key, which I happen to have kind of a bad key over here. So I can bring this over to kind of cover up some of those edges that weren't quite perfect. So, but we don't really want a stroke around this. But I can also come in here, layer styles. I can add a drop shadow. Change the size of that. And the distance. And the angle. So now it looks like she's in front of this paper. So really kind of some cool stuff for your compositing. Next, let's talk about rotoscoping. So I'm going to bring in another piece of footage. Let's go ahead and hide this other footage, the one that I just used. And with this one, again, its scale is too big, so let's bring it down to 67%. With this one, I want to take out what's through the window and say I wanted to replace it with something completely different, or maybe I had something that I wanted to put in the field, or maybe change even the color of the field, and I didn't want to change the rest of this. There's a way you can do that through rotoscoping, and it's not green, so I can't just key it out. And to mask it out with just the pen tool would take forever to get all of these edges just right, and then it's moving around, so I'd have to animate the mask, and it would take a long time. So After Effects has what's called the roto brush. And I'm going to double click on this, and it brings it into this window. And right there, the roto brush, it has a little guy and a paintbrush. And if I click on that, what I can do is it's green, and I just kind of just loosely brush, and it's gonna go and find all the edges automatically. And I'll do it for this window up here, and it does a pretty darn good job. Now, I didn't do this right, and so in order to delete a mask, you hold down Option on your keyboard and it turns it red, and then I can fix this area that it didn't quite get. Now down here at the bottom, there's this range, and I'm going to extend this throughout the whole length of the clip. Now, in order for this to work, I'm just going to hit the space bar on the keyboard, and what it's going to do is it's going to go frame by frame, and it's going to look for the right edges. Now I can see, oh, I didn't quite get his thumb, so I'm going to, and a little bit of the dash. Okay. Then we can go through, and there might be times where it doesn't quite work. You can come in and fix it. And we go forward. Oop, and see, it really kind of messed up here. So let's fix that. And this may seem like it's taking a long time, but trying to do this by hand with the pen tool or anything like that is going to be a lot longer. And I'm just kind of going through and pausing it whenever I need to. And it's playing now. It's doing pretty good. Now, obviously, if I was doing this for a job, I would take a lot more care and detail. But right now, I'm just kind of showing you how the roto brush works. Now, after I got that done, so let's say I've gone through the whole thing, I'm going to come back to my composition, and you can see I've just got the windows. And what I want to do is right here, it says on the effects window, I've got invert foreground background. And I invert it, and now that's completely gone, the background. And so what I want to do is I'm going to duplicate this footage. I'm going to take this bottom layer, and I'm going to take off the roto brush. And what I can do to this footage is I can now independently color correct it. So I'm going to go to Effects, Color Correction, and let's go to my Curves effect. And I can do all sorts of cool stuff. And it's only going to affect just what's out there. So now as I go through this, I've got a different background. So I can turn on and off this roto brush on this top layer, and this bottom layer, remember, that's the one that we color corrected. And it shows through the hole that was cut out from the roto brush. So one last thing you can do with the roto brush is there's an effect. If we go into matte, it's called Refine Hard Matte and Refine Soft Matte. I'm going to do a Refine Soft Matte. Click it in there, and it's going to fine tune some of these edges. You can see with and without it, it's fine tuning the edge. And what the Refine Soft Matte is really good for is areas where it's not exactly hard. Say you've got trees, or some of the hair is kind of flowing out into the spot where you're doing your roto brush. The Refine Soft Matte is going to really help out with stuff like that. But as for a quick way to do some color correction, this would be a way of doing like a sky replacement, or just color correcting a certain area. This is how you would do it. So in recap, all the things I talked about here all have to do with compositing. cutting holes in something, putting layers on top of other layers. And so we talked about track mats, we talked about masking, we talked about transfer modes, we talked about using the chroma key effect with keylight, and then lastly we talked about rotoscoping. Thank you for watching and participating in this course. Feel free to comment and share this video with others. In the next video we'll cover text layers and working with text. Again, this is Mikey Bort for PremiumBeat.com. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.